And Peter, turn it over to you.
All right. Thanks, Karen. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Paulette, for that great opening, and Hugo for all of your remarks as well. I took some notes. EO is not law, right, Paulette? Executive orders are not laws. And lipstick on a pig doesn't count, right, Hugo? So I should mention that I served in the federal government in the first Obama administration, Department of Education. And as you probably all know, they're talking about getting rid of the whole department. So I'm very much involved with a lot of people who are really shattered by what's going on in Washington. Uh, and so it's in that context that I'm thinking about this issue. As Karen said, I've worked in communications, politics over the years. And, one of the goals I try to do when I advise a client about an issue like this is, can we make this conversation safe? Or is it inherently risky, and is it going to keep getting risky? And in order to do that, I often start in most issues, and I would start on this issue with values. What are the values that people share? Before we get to how a DEI program works and what the training looks like and what the issues are and who's in violation and all that kind of stuff, what are the values that we share? Do we share a value for merit-based hiring, for example? That could be a value that we share. Do we share a value for diversity without necessarily saying how we're going to get there? It's hard to argue against diversity as a value. It may be easier to argue against some specific affirmative action program or something like that, but it's hard to argue against diversity. Do we share a value for a safe and supportive work environment where women feel safe from harassment? Do we share a value for profits? If we're a corporation, we do. Corporations, if you work for a corporation, you certainly don't want the corporation to go out of business. Do you share a value for creative problem solving, for teamwork, for tolerance, for environmentalism, and yes, for inclusion? So I think that when you begin with values, it's just a healthy place to begin. Costco has 4 values on their website: do the right thing, respect our differences, contribute to our communities, and care for the environment. I'm not going to reflect on their values. I'm just pointing out that they begin with those and they put them front and center. So as all of you in your different organizations begin to think about how do we talk about this work, I would urge you to begin by talking about your values, by getting clear on them, learning how to articulate them in a easy way. Courage, somebody mentions down below in the chat. So the second thing is that I believe in concrete facts when it comes to these discussions. I think that fact-free debates are usually fruitless. And what I've seen a lot of coming out of in today's politics, coming out of the Trump administration, and others, are fact-free debates. Let's find an anecdote. Let's talk about Haitians eating pets in Springfield, Ohio, and forget the actual facts of what's going on. And the facts are still pretty much on the side of DEI, and in part because we've only had so much impact to date. The Wall Street Journal had a big article the other day that was based on an analysis of 13 million workers at the S&P 500 companies. And it found that white males are 29% of the workforce, but 50% of senior managers and execs. White females are 22% of the workforce and 24%. By those measures, they're doing okay. Non-white males are 25% of the workforce, 17% of senior execs. Non-white females are 24 and 9. So you have some facts, and it's just always good to be based in facts. I saw a big New York Times piece on the University of Michigan, basically saying that years and years of efforts to diversify the student body had not met its goals. That's an argument for continuing, not for abandoning, in my opinion. But it was nevertheless useful to see the numbers and see the facts. So, as I said, start with values, include your facts, have your facts straight. The other thing I thought about with this issue, and again, I spent a lot of time thinking about it after Karen asked me to join this panel, is that this is very multidimensional. It tends to be sort of seen by everybody as about race only. But we know that it's not just about race. It's about race, it's about gender, it's about age, it's about people with disabilities, it can be about sexual orientation, it can be about geographic, rural, suburban, urban, veterans. And you'll see that some of the organizations that are committing, remaining committed to DEI are talking about veterans. As we know, they are a special class of people that have very, very strong public support, and yet they also have some very alarming numbers about their success levels. It could be faith-based. So the point is that this is a very multi-dimensional conversation, and our goal here is to create a bigger tent for DEI, not a smaller tent. We want to give as many people as possible a stake in what we're doing. So those are 3 points, values, the numbers, multidimensional. And finally, you get to what I think has to be the heart of any communication strategy, and that is, what is the case for DEI? What is the argument you're making? What is the purpose of it, of doing it? And it could be a lot of things. It could be customer comfort or customer value, diverse employees, for a diverse customer base. It could be about morale among employees, and I'm going to reference in a minute a small business survey that talks about that. It could be about creative problem solving. It could be about competitive advantage in business. It could also be about fairness and justice, righting historical wrongs. There's a lot of different arguments to be made, and it's good to really be clear on those arguments and have them clear in your own head. Um, I found a whole bunch of evidence as I was looking around. That University of Michigan story talked about the diversity bonus. Removing diversity initiatives reduces the ability to compete in the market. Increasing the diversity bonus, increasing diversity, brings in differences in how people think, differences in problem representation, knowledge-based, heuristics. There's a word, there's a complicated word. So there are arguments to be made in favor of this. And it's just important that, as I said, when you build your values, when you have your numbers straight, when you have your arguments straight, you're in a better position to make the case for it. And when you hear the people moving away from it, like Target, for example, it's just interesting. They just talk about the evolving situation. So I think that they're abandoning their values. McKinsey did a major study on this. They came up with 5 reasons why it works: financial performance, innovation, creativity, market reach, employee engagement and retention, improved decision making. I think the bottom line, and I try and be as simplistic as possible about this, because for the most part, I think you're communicating to folks who are not 100% focused on this issue, haven't thought about it nearly as much as we have, or as much as whoever is speaking has. It's good for morale and it's good for business. And I think those 2 arguments are deeply researched, and there's plenty of evidence for it. Um, uh, one of the surveys I saw found that anti-discrimination and anti-harassment was the #1 reason why people were embracing DEI. Inclusive hiring was second, community engagement was third, and culture was fourth. So it's easy to lock into one of these things, but the truth is there's a lot of arguments to be made in favor of this, and you can't necessarily make them all. As I think Hugo pointed out, or maybe Karen, there are companies that are abandoning this: Target, Walmart, McDonald's, or at least retreating. Target quit, I think, 4 days after Trump was inaugurated, citing the evolving landscape, which, let's face it, is politics. So in fact, Target actually has a pretty good record. They're pretty diverse gender-wise and pretty diverse racially in terms of their employees. But I suspect, and I didn't see the numbers, but I suspect that they have the senior executives tilted one direction. JP Morgan is sticking with it. And they flat out said, we believe in merit-based hiring. We believe in fairness. I think Hugo said, or somebody said that merit-based hiring and DEI are not incompatible. They can be consistent. And JP Morgan is exactly saying that very same thing. They're also saying they think it's a competitive advantage. They're also saying they believe in fairness. So there are three arguments JP Morgan has put out there: fairness, competitive advantage, and merit-based hiring. That's what we have. I wanted, and they also mention the Black community, the Hispanic community, LGBT community, and veterans in their messaging. So I think that's interesting as well, that they've added veterans into their messaging. Again, I found a number of other references to merit-based hiring, so I think that's good. Costco starts out their messaging by emphatically stating that they do not believe in quotas. So that's a defensive answer that they get there. Don't call this quotas. This is not quotas. We believe in hiring the very best people. So the most qualified individuals. So again, they are seizing merit-based hiring. And one of those interesting things about merit-based hiring is that as an argument, it cuts both ways. So who owns merit-based hiring? Pro-DEI or anti-DEI? Right? Folks who are against DEI claim it's not merit-based hiring, but folks who are pro-DEI are making the same point. We have evidence of people of color or women who don't get hired even though they are more qualified. So if you believe in merit-based hiring, you can't automatically be against DEI if you want to be consistent. Consistency, by the way, isn't necessarily a value for everybody, to get back to our values, but it should be. Again, a lot of talk in Costco's messaging around creativity and innovation in the merchandise and services that we offer. Now, interestingly, despite Costco's commitment, which is great, and they deserve a huge nod, they have struggled, especially at the executive ranks. 81% of Costco executives were white, 72% are men. So it's good that they're continuing their commitment because they have challenges. I looked up a small business survey that very recent, very, very interesting. Three quick findings I want to share. And I share all this because I think this is how you help build arguments, Beyond general business performance, small business owners cited three specific benefits. One, improved workplace culture. Two, ability to recruit top talent. And three, employee happiness. So again, employee morale, lower turnover. These are important things, and these are part of the arguments you want to make. They talked about intentional action, impact on culture, and business benefits. I want to make a couple of cautionary notes. As I said, things like merit-based hiring can cut both ways, pro or anti-DEI. I think we can own it. We should own it. I think we can own fairness. The other side, anti-DEI, likes to say they're the ones who are committed to fairness. Don't let them steal that issue. We own both of those issues, fairness and merit-based, or take ownership of them, claim them for yourself. Now, having said all that, obviously, we live in a culture, we live in a dynamic environment. 4 years ago, after George Floyd, there was a lot of talk about defunding police. Today, no one's talking about defunding police, right? 4 years ago, I mean, over the last many years, there's a lot been talk about DEI. Today, it's being attacked. Today, white male grievance is back. Wall Street Journal had an article the other day saying, "Will white men quit complaining?" And they talked about how they have been complaining and blaming others for job loss, educational failure, economic problems, and drug addictions. They started out with a quote: "White male is the most persecuted person in the United States." And that quote is from 1993, a Newsweek cover story. So this has been around for a long time. It sort of never goes away. There's one other little phenomenon that happens, and that is a lot of times in these debates, there's enough of a kernel of truth to make the lies succeed. So, for example, there is a kernel of truth in the fact that men, including white men, but men overall, are struggling with a lot of issues. by so many measures, they're in decline, except apparently among S&P 500 executive jobs. Um, Report out of Britain that women are now earning more than men. There's a new organization called the American Institute for Boys and Men by Richard Reeves. And they talk about all kinds of things, substance abuse, educational attainment. I think the attainment gap between women and men is in college is now 17 points. So it's something like 58-41. So there's some reality here to the claim that we're slipping. The question is, what's the solution to that? And attacking DEI is not the solution. Any communication strategy needs to think about audiences. Different audiences see things differently. So if you're talking to an audience by age or race, political affiliation, personal experience, you're going to talk about this issue differently. If you're talking to a suburban, mostly white chamber of commerce, you might talk about it, use different facts or certain facts. Not really a different message, but you have to modulate your presentation versus, talking to an inner city Black church group or something like that. So you need to understand who your audience is. I think one of the things we want to be a little careful about is judgment, avoiding judgment, because that tends to be what triggers people. Most people in the world didn't design the world we have today, but they live with it. Maybe they accept it. Maybe they do nothing about it. Maybe they are driving it, like the president, for example. But for the most part, you're going to be talking to people who aren't maybe even aware of their own bias, maybe not in a position to do much about it. So you just have to be careful about judgment when we're talking about this thing. I think that most people believe that one of the struggles the Democratic Party has faced is that we were super woke, which is great, to be, in my opinion, to be woke, but to be woke on steroids maybe is a little too much. And so to be show a little grace to people who are struggling with these issues. I've made mistakes myself, and I've been called out for them. And it's never easy to do that. But that's the safe conversation we're trying to have. Can we honestly and safely confront you on this issue without making you my enemy? There's a word called framing. Framing is important. How do we frame this issue? You think about some recent framings. Me Too movement. That's a framing, right? That means we're all in this, right? Driving while black, right? Again, that's a way to frame an issue. A Day Without Mexicans. I don't know if you know that movie. It's a movie that highlighted how dependent our economy is on Mexicans. So what's our frame here? Is it institutional racism or is it good for business? Is it safe workplace or is it employee morale? Think about framing. Try and avoid what is hard to avoid today, which is extremism. I'm zipping through this here. Extremism, because that's the currency of today. We live in a world of extremes. Everything's extreme. Not all police are Derek Chauvin, who killed George Floyd. Not all men are Harvey Weinstein. But that doesn't mean that the microaggressions that women feel all the time from men is not important. It's really important. So again, not everybody's Harvey Weinstein, but there are microaggressions that women feel all the time that are just as damaging in many ways, or equally damaging. So and nobody knows this better than the president, whose executive order is just filled with extreme language. Undermine our national unity, undermine traditional values, identity-based spoil system, disastrous consequences, pernicious discrimination. So I'm going to sum up with my 4 or 5 points here. Values, know your numbers, multidimensional, not just race, but it's gender and everything. The case for DEI, moral, social, economic, management case. And then own the reasonable. Be the voice of reason, not the voice of extremity. And I realize that extremity can sometimes get you the headlines that reasonableness doesn't, but I still encourage it. And I'm going to give you what I think is an essential thing for everybody. We live in a world of limited attention spans, And whenever I give people communications advice, I say, well, whatever you're saying, you need to be able to say it in 60 seconds or less. If you're on a radio show, if you're in an elevator, the proverbial elevator speech, you need to have it. You need to be able to make this argument relatively simply. So I'm going to give you my version of it. There's nothing magic about it. I don't know if it's perfect, but I'll close with it. Whether you work in business, government, nonprofit, or academia, your work is shaped by values, yours, your coworkers, your employers. Most of us want a safe workplace that is free of harassment. Most of us want a diverse workplace. Most of us want an efficient, effective workplace. We all believe we should hire the very best people possible to do the job. No one wants to work with low performers. No one wants to hire them. So acting on those values and goals, our organization is making sure that we're not, either intentionally or unintentionally, tilting the playing field in any one direction that could undermine us. Too many people of one gender or race or faith or viewpoint, or too few people with differing views and differing skills will undermine our larger goals, whether that be profits in the case of a private company, impact in the case of a nonprofit, or service in the case of a public agency. Diversity helps advance our values and goals. It challenges our thinking. Surveys show that diverse workplaces appeal to customers and the public. They boost morale. There's less turnover and better bottom line results. To paraphrase the Godfather, Michael Corleone, DEI isn't just personal, it's business.